Capcom, or the capsule communicator in Houston, but not necessarily talking to Dragon. So once we get into these proximity operations, when Dragon is getting closer to the space station, that allows us to configure this loop where everyone can talk to each other at the same time. And we did hear that both Dragon, Freedom, and the space station are pretty excited to be able to see each other. So we are, again, coming up on that approach initiation burn that's really going to set things into motion this morning in just about 9 minutes now.
It's really exciting, and you can also hear that enthusiasm from the astronauts on board the International Space Station as they make that confirmation of contact over the big loop with Crew 9 on board Dragon right now. Returning a little bit to the history of Alexander Gorbanov's path to flight today, before his cosmonaut selection in 2018, he worked as an engineer for a rocket space corporation and helped support cargo spacecraft launches from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Let's hear a little bit more about his career from Alexander himself.
Практически самое неизвестное, что сейчас у нас есть. Поэтому мы все время стараемся изучить этот космос как можно больше, изучить, как устроена Вселенная. Исходя из этих знаний, эти фундаментальные знания, мы, может быть, получим в дальнейшем какие-то новые технологии. My name is Alexander Gorbanov, and I'm the mission specialist for NASA's SpaceX Crew 9 mission to the International Space Station. Я родился в городе Железногорске, Курской области. Это примерно в 500 километрах на юг от Москвы. Мне нравилась, например, биология. И когда я был совсем маленьким ребенком, хотел быть биологом. Затем я познакомился с авиамоделированием. После этого меня мысль о том, чтобы стать инженером, в частности в космической отрасли, полностью захватила. И в старших классах я уже осознанно готовился. Я закончил Московский авиационный институт по направлению космические летательные аппараты и разгонные блоки. По образованию я инженер. Учась в институте, я также параллельно работал. После этого я поставил себе цель попасть в отряд космонавтов. На это ушло примерно 10 лет. И в 2018 году я был отобран в отряд космонавтов. Международная кооперация – это одна из самых важнейших частей при исследовании космоса. Мне кажется, что когда человек выходит за пределы земной атмосферы, то он становится не только представителем своего государства или своей нации, но также представителем всего человечества. Когда я учился в институте, то ходил в горные походы, в зимние походы, научился нырять с аквалангом. Но самое вдохновляющее увлечение, которое у меня сохранилось до сих пор, это парапланеризм. Это невероятное, непередаваемое ощущение, когда ты летишь, и тебя сопровождает только звук ветра. Но я думаю, это похожее увлечение. С каждым годом все выше и выше. Чем больше занимаешься парапланеризмом, тем выше получается подняться на параплане. Соответственно, следующая ступень — космос, но без параплана.
Now, a lot of work has been done on the space station before we got to today to make sure we were launching Dragon and this new crew to a fully functional orbital laboratory. After the post-sleep period this morning, the crew got right into preparing for Dragon arrival. NASA astronauts Matt Dominic and Mike Barrett will be in the station's cupola, that bay window looking down on Earth, using special software to track Dragon's approach and make sure it's staying in the expected zones.
Once Dragon is docked, Jeanette Epps will be primed to move right into hatch operations. She'll start by opening the large hatch at Node 2 forward, giving her access inside the pressurized mating adapter.
The crew will then have to pressurize the vestibule. That's the small space between the hatches on Dragon and the space station. That vestibule is exposed to vacuum prior to docking, so the crew will need to fill it with air and make sure its pressure is nearly equal with the atmospheric pressures on Dragon and on the station. Epps will use a small valve on the station's hatch to slowly introduce air into the vestibule. Flight controllers here in Houston will monitor the pressure and temperature readings inside and verify that everything is leak-free before we get ready to open up the hatches.
Of course, preparation began prior to crew arrival to make sure they have somewhere to stay. The astronauts have available temporary campout locations, known as casas, that they can stay in until we're back to our usual 7 people living and working on station.
Yeah, so we're excited to get those 2 new crew members aboard and bring Expedition 72 up to 11 crew members for handover. So this is what Expedition 72 will look like once we have our Crew 8 return next week. 6 crew members arrived. Obviously, we have Butch and Sunny who arrived on Starliner. We have Nick and Alexander who are arriving today on Dragon. And then we have our other 3 crew members, including NASA astronaut Don Pettit, who arrived just a couple of weeks ago on a Soyuz spacecraft, and they are part of Expedition 72. I can't believe we're already up to 72 expeditions now, but we have had humans living and working in space for over 23 years continuously now. So if you are under 23 years old, there has never been a day of your life when all humans have been on the Earth at the same time, which sounds like
That's awesome.
It's so sci-fi. It sounds like
That's
the future,
really cool.
but it's
Yeah.
now. So right now, that Expedition 72 crew aboard the station is awake, and they are preparing for Dragon's approach, and they sound pretty excited about it too.
Yeah, they do. Speaking of Dragon, development of Dragon for crew started with Dragon carrying cargo. Dragon was designed from the beginning for flying humans to space, so much so that even the first Dragon had a window. Before we could fly humans, teams implemented a number of design upgrades to make sure both Dragon and Falcon 9 are suitable for flying people. Then we put both vehicles through thousands of tests to prove their safety. Dragon is capable of carrying up to 7 passengers to and from Earth orbit and beyond. It is the only spacecraft currently flying that is capable of returning significant amounts of cargo to Earth, and is the first private spacecraft to take humans to the space station. Dragon is fully autonomous, which means it can basically fly itself, but also features full manual override capabilities in case of an emergency.
Now, we did just hear that the approach initiation burn just started, so that is about a 90-second burn. It did come a couple of minutes earlier than we were expecting it today, but so far it seems like everything is going well, and we are standing by for the burn completion. Again, this is really going to set things into motion for us today. This approach initiation burn moves, it happens when Dragon's about 2.5 kilometers below the station, just about 7 kilometers behind it, and that'll swing Dragon up until it's about quarter mile, which is about 400 meters directly below the station.
And of course, each one of these maneuvers are about very gradually approaching station with Dragon, just to make sure that we approach slowly and carefully. Even though these vehicles look like they're moving quite slowly relative to each other, each one is traveling more than 17,000 miles an hour.
Freedom SpaceX on the big loop. Nominal approach initiation maneuver complete. SpaceX copies. Holding in section 6. We'll give you a go for suit leak check shortly.
All right, we love that word nominal.
Always good.
Everything as expected for the approach initiation burn. Again, about a 90-second burn. That's also eventually going to move Dragon into the approach ellipsoid, one of those invisible spheres or oval that we monitor as spacecraft arrive and depart the International Space Station. It doesn't matter whether there's crew on board or whether it's a cargo spacecraft. This is kind of our boundaries or our neighborhood around the space station that all the flight controllers keep their eye on for anything that's approaching or departing.
And that really a methodical approach to approaching station was a big part of how Dragon was designed from the very beginning. Like we were talking about earlier, whether it's cargo or crew, we always approach station in a really similar way. Now, speaking of these two vehicles, which are about to meet up in space, even though we had those earlier views where...
Freedom SpaceX on the big loop, looking for you're okay to come back on board with cameras.
Good news there that we should soon be getting views of our Crew 9 astronauts on board Dragon, suited up and ready to approach the station.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited that we did hear they were putting their suits back on earlier, and so they're going to get into some leak checks and make sure that everything is safe. They'll keep those suits on for the remainder of the approach to the International Space Station, all throughout docking. And then once we complete the docking and we're successfully attached to the space station, they'll have a chance to get out of those suits and probably into their flight suits or something else while we work to pressurize that vestibule and before we open the hatch. So again, we're targeting docking today around, let's see, I believe 1:30 p.m. Pacific time.
Getting close.
I'm trying to work on my my time zones, but I feel like I'm in a bunch of different places.
Well, we're communicating with a bunch of different places
Yeah.
between here, Houston. Obviously, we've got the station on Greenwich Mean Time, so we're jumping around across the world a little bit. But the good news is that for our Expedition 72 crew, Dragon is getting bigger in the window as it gets ever closer to the ISS. But Dragon's actually pretty big to begin with. The Dragon spacecraft and its trunk stand over 26 feet tall. There are 2 windows on the spacecraft, plus one under the nose cone. The nose cone opened shortly after launch, so if you were with us yesterday, you heard us call out that major milestone, which allows us to expose the forward bulkhead thrusters and docking mechanism that will connect with the International Space Station. Dragon's trunk holds solar cells, which power Dragon while it's in free flight, and the trunk can also carry unpressurized cargo to the station.
Now, Dragon has 16 Draco thrusters that can be used in space to help navigate the spacecraft to its destination, each providing 90 pounds of force, which really takes you a long way once you're in the vacuum of space. That doesn't include the 8 Super Draco thrusters used for an abort, which are no longer active once the crew is in orbit.
Dragon has played a significant role in advancing our future in space by safely transporting crew to and from the space station. There are currently 4 Dragon spacecraft supporting human spaceflight missions that have docked to the station: Endeavour, Resilience, Endurance, and Freedom. Crew 9 are on board Freedom today, which previously flew NASA's SpaceX Crew 4, in addition to the commercial Axiom missions AX2 and AX3.
Altogether, the reusable Dragon spacecraft have completed 8 human spaceflight missions on behalf of NASA and visited the station 42 times under NASA's commercial resupply and commercial crew program so far. As we mentioned earlier, Crew 9 is Dragon's 15th human spaceflight mission since 2020. Now, that includes these commercial crew program missions for NASA, as well as the private astronaut missions with Axiom, Inspiration 4, and Polaris Dawn, which recently launched. And that is when Dragon became the first private spacecraft to take humans to the International Space Station with Demonstration Mission 2 in 2020. Now, you might be wondering, what do the astronauts do once they get to the International Space Station? And I can tell you they stay extremely busy. So over the last 23 years, crews aboard the space station have completed thousands of scientific and educational experiments, and Crew 9 is prepared to add to that growing number. Crew 9 will conduct hundreds of science experiments and technology demonstrations during their mission, and they will spend several months, I think about 5 months, working on the orbital laboratory. Yeah. Of course, having more crew members on board significantly expands the amount of research that we can conduct. And this crew will conduct new scientific research to prepare for human exploration beyond where we're at now in low Earth orbit and benefit humanity on Earth.
Experiments include studies of blood clotting, effects of moisture on plants grown in space.
SpaceX on the big loop for suit leak checks. We're going to wait to perform the suit leak checks until the other side of an upcoming TEDRS handover, so I'll be back with you in about 6 minutes to step into suit leak checks.
Good news for Mission Control there that we are about to step into those suit leak checks, but we are expecting a slight communications gap in our TDRS coverage. That's the call out you heard, that we're expecting a little bit of a handover with that system. So what we're going to do now is wait before moving into that procedure just to make sure that we have constant communications throughout it. Speaking of things that are happening constantly, back to our experiments on board the station, we're also going to be studying vision changes in astronauts. Those are just a few of more than 200 scientific experiments and technology demonstrations taking place during this mission. These projects span a wide range of disciplines, from life and physical sciences to advanced materials, technology development, in-space production applications, and even student-led research, which are always some of my favorite experiments. Results from those studies will bring value to humanity both on Earth and in space, further our ability to explore, and enable a robust market in low Earth orbit.
So let's break it down a little bit more and talk specifically about some of the experiments that will be happening while Crew 9 is aboard the space station. The megakaryocytes orbiting in outer space and near-Earth research experiment investigates how environmental conditions affect the development and function of megakaryocytes and platelets. I had no idea what megakaryocytes were, but they are large cells found in bone marrow and platelets, and pieces of these cells play important roles in blood clotting and immune response. Results could provide critical knowledge about the risk of changes in inflammation, immune responses, and clot formation in spaceflight, but also here on the ground.
It is amazing to me how different the microgravity environment is, and that it gives us the opportunity to study these Earth-based processes in a way that help our astronauts, but also people here on Earth.
Yeah.
In addition to a lot of those biologically oriented experiments, the Neutron Star Interior Composition Explorer, or NICER telescope for short, on the exterior of the space station measures X-rays emitted by neutron stars and other cosmic objects. Through that, they're helping to answer questions about matter and gravity. In May of 2023, NICER developed a light leak, which is allowing sunlight to interfere with daytime measurements. Special patches have been designed to cover some of that damage, and those will be installed during a future spacewalk, returning the instrument to around-the-clock operations.
And that's a plug for me. If you've never watched a spacewalk, if you've always gotten to watch a launch or a docking, but you've never taken the time to tune in when we have 2 crew members outside of the hatch, I have to encourage it. It is some of the most incredible work from the teams on the ground to the teams on the space station and, of course, the crew members outside. So it sounds like we're going to have some of those coming up to conduct that experiment and that installation. So keep an eye on blogs.nasa.gov or just nasa.gov in general for when you can look to watch any spacewalks. Back to some of the research. Some astronauts experience vision changes, and it's a condition that we call SANS, or Spaceflight Associated Neuroocular Syndrome. There's a B complex investigation testing whether just a daily B vitamin supplement can prevent or mitigate this problem and assess how genetics may influence individual response. Now, one of those variations could be related to a metabolic pathway that requires B vitamins to function properly. And when we have inefficiencies in this pathway, it can affect the inner lining of blood vessels, and that can result in leaks that actually may contribute to vision changes. So providing B vitamins that are known to affect blood vessel function positively could minimize issues in who we find to be genetically at-risk astronauts.
As people travel farther from Earth for longer, growing food also becomes increasingly important. Scientists conducted many plant growth experiments on the space station using its veggie hardware, including Veg-01B, which demonstrated that outrageous red romaine lettuce is suitable for crop production in space. Plant Habitat 07 uses this lettuce to examine how moisture conditions affect the nutritional quality and microbial safety of plants. The advanced plant habitat controls humidity, temperature, air, light, and soil moisture, creating the precise conditions needed for this experiment.
I absolutely love the veggie experiments. I think they're some of the most visual experiments that we have on the International Space Station. We have grown everything from zinnias. I don't know if you recall when...
Those are beautiful photos too.
They're so beautiful. If you haven't seen them yet, astronaut Scott Kelly, he spent about a year in space, and he grew some zinnias and took some beautiful pictures in the cupola. And it's just such an amazing contrast of, Earth and space, and it's so... You can hardly, you can't live in just outer space. And here are these beautiful zinnias inside our beautiful habitat of the space station. So those are amazing. And they've also grown some chili peppers,
Hatch chilies are my favorite. So this is my favorite experiment that's ever been done on space station, just because I think it would be fun to get to grow something and then eat it in space.
Yeah, and of course the lettuce too. Everybody loves a fresh salad. So
oh yeah.
I won't say everybody, but I do. Now, there are currently nine astronauts and cosmonauts living aboard the International Space Station. They are Expedition 72. Of course, that includes the 4 Crew 8 members. They arrived in March 2024, and we expect them to return sometime next week. We're still looking at dates and weather and things like that. But stay tuned to nasa.gov for the latest updates on their return. That includes NASA astronauts Matt Dominic, Michael Barrett, and Jeanette Epps, as well as Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gubyankin. So when Alexander Gorbanov gets there today, we'll have 2 Alexanders on board. And of course, on the Soyuz spacecraft that launched just a couple of weeks ago, we have NASA astronaut Don Pettit, and then Roscosmos cosmonauts Alexei Ovchinin and Ivan Bogner. And a really fun fact about Alexei.
Freedom SpaceX on the big loop for suit leak checks. Nick, you are go for suit leak checks per 4.011.
2 decibel 2 ready to pressurize.